You're listening to Insights with Philip Wilson, where the discussion focuses on how to maximize Social Security benefits. Considering there are 567 ways to file and 3,000 rules for filing, it's no wonder that 90% of those who file for Social Security do not receive their maximum benefits. Listen in as Philip Wilson, who is certified in Social Security claiming strategies, outlines what you need to know to get the most from your Social Security benefits.
Welcome to the show. We've been talking the last several weeks about the most important financial decision that you will make in your lifetime. A decision that 90% of the population does not make correctly. 9 out of 10 people listening to this program do not make the correct financial decision because a lot of information is required for it. There's a lot of complexity. It's the biggest reason why I teach seminars. I spend an awful lot of time every week different venues, trying to spread the message. It's the reason why I'm doing this radio show. I want people to be informed about this decision. And the decision, of course, is the decision of when and how to file for your Social Security. I believe the decision of when and to file for your Social Security is the most important financial decision that you will make in your lifetime. And just to set that up, the reason why I believe that, if you ever hear me speak at different venues, you will hear a very common theme. And the common theme is that the importance of income streams for life, streams of income that you cannot outlive. So as long as you're alive, they're there. So whether you live to be 85 or 185, you have a stream of income. This is the first generation in history that will spend more time in retirement than working. And with that, the likelihood of people outliving their assets has never been greater. I've mentioned before in previous weeks that 95% of the people that I meet with are just not prepared for retirement. They've done everything they can to get the kids out of school, get them on their own, but they're just not prepared. They're just not going to have enough time. They're doing the best they can. I want to encourage them. I don't want to discourage them, but the reality is if something doesn't go well in retirement, they're going to be in trouble. If somebody gets sick, somebody dies, they're going to have a hard time. So it's very, very important to me to encourage folks in this area, particularly with the income streams for life. Because one of the ways that I look at the income streams for life is that it's an endless asset. It's an asset that never runs out. So the goal of maximizing that income stream from Social Security, I believe, is the most important financial decision that you will make in your lifetime. Social Security is the largest income source for most people in retirement and is really the only income source that lasts for your lifetime. Pensions are being phased out by corporations. They just don't exist anymore. Very few people have that. Most people do not have a source of income outside of Social Security that will last for the rest of their life. So this is a very important topic. But however, today I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about it a little bit in a little bit of a different way. Over the last several weeks, we've been talking about different ways to take Social Security, different strategies to take Social Security. I mentioned that over 90% of people filing for Social Security do not receive their maximum amount. And the biggest reason for that is there's 3,000 Social Security filing rules. Most people are not aware of them. Most people are not aware of the different strategies that you can be involved in terms of filing for Social Security, so a lot of money gets left on the table. And we've been talking about that the last few weeks. But today I want to have a little bit different angle. I want to talk a little bit about the optimal time to file for Social Security. What is the best time to file for Social Security? Not so much the different strategies involved. And you may recall in previous weeks we talked a lot about the situations in life tend to direct those different strategies. Have you been divorced? Are you single? Are you married? Are you a widow? That's typically where these different strategies come from. But today I just want to talk about what is the best time to file for Social Security, what age to file for Social Security. What is the optimal time to file for Social Security? Because I believe everyone should file at a certain age. Now, over the years, I've heard a lot of different opinions on this subject. Heard a lot of different people. Some people believe that you should file early for Social Security. A lot of people feel like if you don't file early, the government's going to run out of money. You need to receive the money when you can. Some people say, no, don't file early. You don't want the reduced Social Security amounts. You need to wait until your full retirement age. Other people say, no, wait till you're 70 to file for Social Security so you can get the increased amounts. Today what I want to talk about is my opinion that everyone listening should consider as far as when to file for Social Security. I also see from time to time some break-even studies in popular magazines like Money Magazine. I'll hear Dave Ramsey or somebody comment on the subject. Most of the time when people are discussing this, they talk about the break-even. How old do you need to be before it's better or before it's worse? And there's a general rule of thumb that the break-even is age 80. So the thought process is that if you live to age 80 or beyond, you're better off waiting on Social Security. If you don't live to age 80, you're better off filing early, so you can receive everything that's possible for you to receive. Now, I'm not really sure what value that rule is because no one really knows when they're going to die. So in general, I discount that type of study. I discount that type of break-even thought process because I just don't know how anybody can make a decision regarding Social Security and when to file for it based on how long they're going to live. No one's going to be able to base this on their life expectancy. So I'd like to teach an example that I use in my seminars because I feel like the best way to help people understand these different principles associated with when to file for Social Security is actually through a case study. So this is a case study directly out of the seminars that I teach every week. And I feel like this is the best way to teach these different principles. However, this is going to be a little bit more challenging for me to do this over the radio as opposed to a PowerPoint presentation, which is what I'm used to. So let me just describe the example, the case study for you, the assumptions, and we'll just see how it goes. But what I want to talk about today is an example of Jim and Sally. And Jim and Sally are age 66 and they like to retire. And I have some assumptions for Jim and Sally that we can work off of, although the assumptions aren't really that important. The numbers themselves aren't vital to the conclusions. You can plug in your own numbers in your own situation and draw your own conclusions. The most important thing here is for you to follow along how it would help them decide whether or not they can retire, what things they need to look at to answer the different questions. And by doing that, if you can follow along with that, you can plug in your own situation and determine your own answers. So let's talk about Jim and Sally. Jim and Sally are age 66. And for purposes of this example, I'm going to assume that that's their full retirement age, just to simplify that. And the two assumptions there's really three assumptions, but two of the three that I want to go ahead and give to you is that Jim and Sally have their house paid for and they have $350,000 of assets. And since they don't have to make a mortgage payment, they need about $3,000 a month for their retirement. So $350,000 of assets, $3,000 a month for budget. Now, their questions are very typical. They're the same questions that I receive every week. What age can we retire? Can we retire now? What age should we file for Social Security? And really the greatest fear is, will we outlive our money? And everyone is concerned about living too long, becoming dependent upon the government or someone else to take care of them. And that usually is the greatest fear that everyone has because they don't want to retire too soon. So how would I answer those questions? What would I tell them? Well, the first thing that I'd want to do is focus on the budget. And often this is something that people haven't really thought about very much. People, over the course of my career, whenever I bring up the word budget, I get a lot of resistance. Most people don't really like to live on a budget. They don't really like to think about a budget. But a budget is even more important in retirement than it is when you're working. Because in retirement, we don't really have the ability to cover up our spending mistakes. When we're working, we can take more hours, we can take a second job, we can take bonuses, we can refinance, we can do things to cover up the overspending. We can't really do that when we retire. So in retirement, a budget is even more important than when we're working. And most of this analysis that I'm going to share with you today is all dependent upon the budget. It's all dependent on how accurate the budget is. The more accurate it is, the better the planning is. The less accurate it is, the less the analysis is going to work. A lot of times when people come to see me, they either don't have a budget or they don't have any idea what they're going to need in retirement, and I will send them home and say, take a look at your checkbook, take a look at your spending, see if you can figure it out. See if you can figure out what expenses are going to continue in retirement, what expenses are not going to continue in retirement. And I just need people to have a good budget. And a lot of times they will have more than one budget. They will have kind of a bare bones budget that I'm using, like in this example of $3,000. They might have a second budget that involves some fun things, grandkids, travel, things like that. They might have a third budget that involves their house. That's generally one of the considerations that most people have on their mind, and that is, should they downsize? Most people that come to see me to talk about retirement have lived in the same home, raised the kids, but there's also a lot of upkeep, property taxes, various other issues, as well as a lot of equity in that home. And they're just trying to figure out whether or not it would be better for them to downsize, maybe find something a little less expensive, maybe use some of that equity, where they need to use some of that equity in retirement. So the point I'm trying to make is that multiple budgets help me. They help me do the planning for retirement even better. So there's three assumptions: $350,000 of assets, $3,000 a month of income, and the third assumption is Social Security. And this is where I'm going to draw some conclusions. For purposes of the example, again, I said that 66 is Jim and Sally's full retirement age, and if they retire at 66 and file for Social Security, they would receive $22,000. Or, in contrast, if they retire but wait for Social Security, they would receive $30,000 at age 70. So the three assumptions: $350,000 of assets, $3,000 a month, and a choice of Social Security of $22,000 or $30,000, depending on what age they draw that. Now, this is where I'm going to compare and contrast some of the conclusions about the Social Security and what the optimal time is to file. Now, the biggest difference between the two Social Security options in Jim and Sally's situation is how much additional income they're going to need above Social Security to provide for the bills. So if they retire at age 66, they file for Social Security, they receive $22,000 from Social Security, their investments are going to have to make up the difference, which is $14,000. So if they have a $3,000 a month budget, $36,000 a year, $22,000 of income coming from Social Security, $14,000 would be the difference. So that's going to give me a pretty good indication of whether or not they have enough assets, because we would have to safely produce that $14,000. Social Security, while it might be the largest income source that most people have, it's not 100% of their retirement income. So when we're looking at retirement and we're trying to figure out whether or not someone has enough savings to make up the income that they need, this is where the budget becomes so important. I need a good budget. I need to know exactly the additional income above Social Security that someone is going to need to live, and that's going to give me an indication of whether or not they have enough investments. So back to the example, $350,000 of assets, $3,000 a month, $22,000 coming from Social Security, or at age 70, if they file for Social Security, they will receive $30,000. And the difference between the $22,000 and the $30,000 would be the increases the Social Security Administration make between full retirement age and age 70. So at that situation, if they did wait for age 70, then they're only going to need to make up $6,000 of income. So the budget was $36,000, $30,000 coming from Social Security, $6,000 coming from investments. And that leads us to our break time, so we'll come back with his example after the break. Welcome back. Let's continue with this example of Jim and Sally. And Jim and Sally are age 66. They're looking to retire. They're trying to figure out whether or not $350,000 of assets is going to allow them to do that. So they want to know what age they should retire, what age they should file for Social Security. And I'm just taking you through an example of how I would answer those questions. The third assumption was Social Security. Should they file at age 66? Should they file at age 70? Now, obviously, at 70, the amount is higher. So the amount of investment income that they're going to need to supplement Social Security is going to be lower. But the biggest difference between age 66 and 70 is what happens in between. If Jim and Sally retire at age 66, file for Social Security at that time, their investments, they need to have enough investments to make up $14,000. Now, if they only have to make up $6,000, which would be the case at age 70, what happens in between? For purposes of example, I'm just using simple math here. I'm not using any kind of rate of returns. But what would have to happen for Jim and Sally is they would have to pull $36,000 from their investments for 4 years. So if they retire at age 66 and do not file for Social Security, their investments are going to have to make up the income that's needed. Then when they receive their Social Security at age 70, their investments would only have to make up that difference of $6,000. Now, if you pull $36,000 from $350,000 of assets for 4 years, you're going to have $206,000 of assets. So you started out at 66 when you retired at $350. You pull $36,000 for 4 years, you have $206,000 at age 70. Now, is that a good idea or is that not a good idea? And this is where I'm going to compare and contrast the different ages. The next step of what I'd want to do with Jim and Sally is take a look at whether or not they're going to outlive their money. You know, the big fear most people have in retirement is that they're going to run out of money. So how can you do that? Well, one of the ways that you can do that is by taking the amount of assets that you have and dividing it by the annual income that's needed to be produced from that. And that will give you a multiple. So in this situation, if we took $350,000 of assets and we divided it by the $14,000 that's needed, that would give us a multiple. And this goes back to the budget again. As I said before, how important this budget is. Well, that $14,000 came from the additional that was needed above Social Security to make the budget. So the budget's not good. This analysis is going to be flawed. But assuming that the budget is good and they do need to produce that additional $14,000 above the $22,000 of Social Security, that will happen 25 times. So $14,000 will go into $350,000 25 times. Or another way of looking at that is that their investments will last for 25 years. So if they retire at age 66 with $350,000 of assets, they start pulling $14,000 of assets every year, they're going to be able to do that for 25 years. But at age 91, their assets are going to run out. Now, this would make me very uncomfortable for Jim and Sally because the life expectancy today for someone age 66 is about 20 years, maybe a little bit longer. So age 91, there's not a lot of margin there. People are living longer. We have to be careful about that. We have to plan for the worst. And this would make me very uncomfortable because running out of money at age 91 is probably going to be a real issue for them. But it would make me even more uncomfortable when I consider what happens in an emergency. This analysis is based on $3,000 a month from the budget. What happens if they have a bill above that? What happens if they have to get a new car? What happens if they need to fix the house? What happens if they need a medical bill paid? They're going to have to draw their assets to do that. So they're going to have to dip into the $350,000 to pay that bill. So any bill above $3,000 is going to need to be paid that way. Well, if you decrease the asset, you're also going to decrease the multiple. So if you decrease the $350,000 of assets, then age 91 is actually a best case scenario. And it's obvious that during the course of retirement, they're going to have some emergencies and some things that happen. So I would be very uncomfortable with that. So if Jim and Sally were coming to me with $350,000 of assets, asking me if they could retire, I'd have to say no. We're going to have to go back to the drawing board. You're going to have to work longer. We're going to have a higher Social Security benefit, a lower budget. We're going to have some combination of that because you're just not ready. Now, what about the second scenario? Remember, the third assumption was $22,000 for Social Security, $30,000 if they waited till age 70. Now, if they wait till age 70, they're going to be drawing down their assets for the 4 years. So they're not going to have $350,000 of assets going forward at 70. They're only going to have $206,000 of assets. But the income that's needed at that time is going to be lower. It's no longer $14,000, it's just $6,000. Because now the Social Security benefit went from $22,000 up to $30,000. Now, if you divide the asset by the income, you're going to find the multiple is 34. So if you take $206,000 of assets and divide it by an annual income of $6,000, it will do that 34 times. So in that scenario, even though they have less assets, they need to produce less income. Their assets do not run out for 34 years. So they actually don't run out till age 104. Now that would make me a lot more comfortable in their situation. That's almost 20 years past life expectancy. A lot of margin there for emergencies as well. So if they need to dip into their assets, with the best case scenario being 104, if it's less than that, it wouldn't make me as uncomfortable. Certainly not as uncomfortable as age 91. So what are my conclusions? What are the points that I'm trying to get across here? And there's basically three principles that I want to get across to you with this example. And we might run out of time today and we'll have to continue next week. But the first principle is that the decision to retire is separate from the decision of when to file for Social Security. The decision to retire is separate from the decision of when to file for Social Security. What I'm trying to show you in this case example, this case study, is that it's better for Jim and Sally to retire at 66 but wait on Social Security. Those decisions need to be made separately. Now, what we typically do is we make them automatically. If you're talking to someone about retiring, generally in that same conversation, they'll say, yeah, I need to go down, get online, go down to the office, get my benefits. We tend to think of them as being the same, and they could be the same, but most likely they're going to be different. So the only point of the first principle is that I want those decisions to be made separately, not automatically. The second principle is that I want you to consider retiring on your assets but waiting on Social Security. Retire on your assets but wait on Social Security. Now, this is the most difficult thing for people to see. And if you go back to the example of Jim and Sally, most people would not conclude that they're better off spending down their assets over a 4-year period to receive an $8,000 higher Social Security benefit. So at age 66, you have $350,000 of assets. But by age 70, you only have $206,000 of assets. So most people would not conclude that you're better off waiting on Social Security by depleting half of your assets. In this scenario, Jim and Sally would have depleted almost half of their assets to receive an $8,000 increase in Social Security. That doesn't really make sense. Most people will conclude they've worked their entire life, they've saved money. Why in the world would they deplete their life savings over a 4-year period just to receive that small increase in Social Security? But what I'm trying to teach you here is that the real benefit in retirement is not the asset. The real benefit in retirement is the income. And this is back to the things that we've been talking about for the last several weeks. This lifetime income, people living longer in retirement than they ever have worked. And just the need to have sources of income that last for that period of time. Someone hitting retirement right now at age 66 would be expected to live 20 or more years. That's going to go up. Life expectancy is increasing. Medical advances and so forth. And just even the other day, I think last week, I heard someone talking about a new diagnostic test for predicting heart attacks. Heart attacks are one of the major causes of death. Now they have a diagnostic test that they can predict whether or not someone's going to have a heart attack, and they can treat that accordingly. Last spring, I heard an interview from the head of the Cleveland Clinic. That doctor was talking about gene therapy, and they have the ability to look at a baby's genes and determine what disease they're going to have, such as cancer. And the key to treating cancer is to do it early. So they can look at a baby and they can determine by looking at their genes whether or not they're going to have cancer, maybe 20 years later, and how you can go ahead and treat that now, and how that's going to prolong life expectancy. In fact, that speaker started talking about people living past 100, and it scared me to death. Because again, 95% of the people that I meet with are just not prepared for that type of life. So the real value to retirement is the income, not the asset. And while it wouldn't appear on the subject that waiting on that increased Social Security benefit would be very beneficial, especially not at the expense of your lifelong savings, but it is, because we're living longer. We need these lifetime income sources. Maximizing the lifetime income source is the most important thing that you need to do in retirement. So retiring on your assets, waiting on Social Security. It's not really logical, doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, but when you think about how long we could live in retirement, it does make a lot of sense. And we're running out of time, so we'll just have to close for today and pick this up next week.
You've been listening to Insights with Philip Wilson, an Alabama registered investment advisor. Learn more by visiting his website at ssmistakes.com or by calling 205-868-9297.